Tu veux que je m'enregistre aussi l'image?
Good morning, Frederic. Thank you for joining us this morning. Frederic, in your book, Reinventing Organization, which is today a worldwide bestseller, you talk about Teal organization as a new way of managing organization in a more efficient and agile way. You talk about these organizations as living organisms. What link could you make between Teal organization and regenerative economy?
I think they're stemming from the same perspective on the world. They're coming from the same form of consciousness, but they look at complementary things. So the regenerative economy is really around what do these organizations do in the outside world, right? How do their actions impact and hopefully regenerate the earth? And what I've been looking at is the internal management practices, right? How do we, manage ourselves and the people internally? And so they're distinct fields, but they're sort of coming up at the same time because they're inspired by a similar form of consciousness, in my perspective. And I've noticed that, you can have one without the other, but it really creates a tension. So what I've heard quite a bit is organizations who do really wonderful work out there in the world, NGOs or for-profits who really do wonderful things. But if they're managed traditionally, internally, with, power hierarchy, a pyramid, ego games, power games, dysfunctional things happening inside, people will very quickly say something isn't right? We're trying to do all these good things out there, and internally, we're still doing it in the old way, right? And I think that's why, in part, why my book has been, I think often people tell me like such a relief for people. They say like, we've been trying to do all this good out, now we also, have an idea or a path forward of how to sort of apply the same principles, but to ourselves. And I think you can take the flip side of that. There are some organizations who really have the most soulful and purposeful practices inside, but what they do out in the world is still participating in, an extractive, way of interacting with the world. And then often, the same thing happens where people say like, yeah, but I feel free enough to speak up. I'm not afraid of power and hierarchy. I feel that I can wonder about some deeper questions, and suddenly then, I really want to talk with my colleagues about what we're doing out there in the world, right? And so I really think that you can have one without the other, but it's pretty uncomfortable, and most likely after a while, people will really question what you're doing.
So it's perfectly complementary.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I know there is no standard solutions when we talk about Teal organization. It's really not a copy-paste approach. If an entrepreneur or manager wants to develop a Teal organization, what should be the main pitfalls to avoid, and also the key success factor to apply in your view?
That's like more than I can answer briefly. I actually have this idea, maybe in the fall I will start a series. I think I wrote down like 60 topics that I would do in short videos about this. But maybe the first thing that I would question is, why do you want to go Teal? Teal as being this expression about some of these, emerging ways to run your organization. And I see it the same in the French-speaking world, where people talk about les entreprises libérées as a concept, as a slogan, and they want to do that. And often the first question I ask leaders is, why do you want to do this? Like, let's not talk about a concept, right? Nobody's called to do a concept. What is it in your own personal experience, in your own history, in where your organization is at, that makes you feel that you're called to do things in a whole new way? And often these become very, very fruitful conversations because these are things that people actually haven't thought about in depth. So I've had really deep, beautiful conversations with a number of CEOs who really wanted to go there, but weren't actually really clear about their motives. And because they weren't clear about their motives, they couldn't talk with others very clearly about it. And so couldn't engage others. I give you one example. There's the CEO of a hospital who really was a very brave person, wants to go in this direction. And she's, somebody floated this term entreprise libérée, and she started using it. And she got a lot of reaction because people said, oh, yes, but this is not possible for us. We're a hospital. You can't just give freedom. Like, imagine life and death. And because this was this abstract thing, people could, resist to it. And we had this beautiful conversation about, why are you called to do this? And at some point, after digging a bit and digging deeper, she brought this most beautiful story that had me had shivers all over, where she said, I'll give you the moment where it was clear for me. I was walking through the hospital at 4 in the afternoon. I was going home early, 4:45, and I saw all the nurses waiting for 4 o'clock to happen next to the time machines to clock out. And she said she was so disgusted with what the organization had done to these nurses, like beautiful people who come to do great work and to do service, and who become these people who 15 minutes before are already waiting to go out. And she said, I feel ashamed of my organization. I no longer want us to do that to people that work for us. And once she told that story in that way, it came from a very deep place. And suddenly it was much easier for her to get other people to join her. Nobody can attack that. Nobody can say, oh no, I think it's a good idea that nurses, are demotivated and wait for 15 minutes. And so that is maybe the biggest pitfall, is to join a concept. And instead the invitation would be, really go and dig with other people and find in your own history, in your own story, in your own aspirations, what drives you to do this, and then invent your own model based on that, rather than my book or another book or any concept.
So listening to your answer, I should summarize telling that at least one of the most important key success factor is connecting the brain and the heart.
Yes.
So Frederic, you spent years working for the biggest business consulting company in the world. You took a sabbatical and you traveled the world to meet probably the most progressive organizations. You wrote a book that became very quickly a reference. And now you have decided to make a step back to spend more time with your family in a very pioneering village in terms of regenerative economy. With your experience and your amazing personal journey, what would be your recommendation to students who are going to jump in the business world next year as entrepreneurs or future managers?
I actually think a lot about, people who are just at that stage in their lives, because I happen to have a few friends who are that age and with whom I've had really meaningful conversations. And, I sometimes feel like I'm still at that age, and then until I, of course, scratch myself and say, no, this was me 20 years ago. And when I contrast that, I realized that the world now is very different from 20 years ago, in the sense that I think there is a consciousness with everyone now that something is fundamentally broken, unsustainable in the world we're in, right? And when I speak with people, if you start digging, you realize that there is no more solid foundations. All the foundations that we're walking on are sort of rotting, decaying under our feet, right? Obviously, the way we deal with the environment and nature is wholly unsustainable. Our energy systems are unsustainable. Our financial systems are unsustainable. Our school systems, everything shows that all the science of how people learn show that what we do in schools is pretty much the opposite of what we should be doing, right? And one of the things is that our whole management system is outdated and feels broken. And so that wasn't the case when I graduated 20 years ago. There was actually, in sort of the business world, sort of a hooray feeling, and we're learning all about these great management methods, and GE was, feted as, every organization should be as advanced as and use their practices. When you speak to business leaders in private now, they will all admit that something isn't working. Like, they don't know how to motivate people. People are burned out. People, aren't happy at work. They don't know how to integrate young people. So we really live in a world where behind the facade, everybody senses that something is broken. And so it's a very special moment, I think, and a very hard moment for young people to go into the world, because the path to the new isn't very clear. So if you're a young person and you want to participate in a regenerative economy, it's not so easy to get there. There are not that many companies who do it, and a lot of the work might be work that isn't really very well paid. And it might be work where your parents look at you and say, "Oh, but seriously, that's not a serious way to, spend your life." And so it takes a lot of courage to go to these new paths. And so what I see happening a lot is that because it's so difficult for us to deal with this dissonance, to actually look and see how everything that we're working with is slowly rotting and decaying. And because it's so difficult to do something about it, a lot of people simply don't want to see it, don't want to look at it, and simply want to continue life as it is, right? And I think if so many managers and organizations, so many leaders are burning out, part is because they work too much and travel too much and all of that, but I think part of it is because they're not connected to the part of themselves that sees all this pain in the world and that actually feels, I want to do something to change that. And instead they just continue on their tracks, right? And so my invitation would be, for those of you listening to this, would be simply to say, as much as possible, try not to put a lid on this very strange place that we're in. This old that is dying and the new that is emerging, but it is difficult to join. And try to stay with that uncomfort. Meet other people who are in that uncomfort. Don't be alone in that. Have conversations around this. And then all decisions are okay. Maybe you join a traditional company that is participating in destroying the world. And you join that for a few years because that's where you're at and you're learning, Like many of the things that I'm doing now, I couldn't have done them if I hadn't participated in the system for a whole while. And so that might be a perfect choice for you to make. Or maybe you find a way to join the regenerative economy or anything of that new world. And that's fantastic too. And don't judge yourself, but don't hide that question. Stay with it, struggle with it, talk with other people about it, and stay with it. And don't become like these zombies that I see in too many organizations, these managers and leaders who are really zombies because they're just not wanting to see what they're seeing. So that would be my invitation.
Frederic, thank you so much for your time and for those very inspirational words. And I hope we will have the chance to meet you very soon. Bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye.